Hey, welcome to another episode of Mike's Collection. I'm Mike. Now, typically I'm doing these videos in front of my toy collection, but as you can see here today, it's pretty blank and boring in here. That's because I'm filming up in the bedroom tonight. And yeah, it's a pretty cozy little spot because I've got Casey asleep on my lap, and I've got Buster asleep by my feet. So because there's not a whole lot to look at here in the bedroom, I'll keep the introduction to this video pretty short. I'll just cut right to the chase of showing you all the new toys that I got in the past week or so. But before I do that, I do just want to quickly show you a couple of shots of Casey in her Halloween costume.
Perfect. Okay. No, honey. Okay.
Happy Halloween, guys.
Happy Halloween.
Okay, so thanks for indulging me in that. Now let's take a look at the figures down in the man cave. But before I do, the first toy I got this week was Barricade from Transformers Siege. And I did just grab a couple of quick shots of him still in the package before I took him downstairs and opened him up. So yeah, here's just a couple quick shots of the box where you'll see some cool artwork on the side, as well as a picture of him in his alt mode, which is a police car on the back of the package. Artwork. Police car. So here you see Barricade outside of the packaging. Here he is from behind. And here he is up close. So I grew up collecting Transformers in the 80s. Transformers has carried on pretty consistently ever since. You had the animated Beast Wars series in the 90s, and then you had Transformers Armada, and then you had the live action movies and Transformers Prime. There's been all kinds of variations. So depending on what era you grew up in, you probably have a different favorite era of Transformers. But I was there at the beginning. I like the early stuff, and that is what is known as Generation 1. So they still make Generation 1 figures and comic books now, but those Generation 1 toy designs are based on the 80s aesthetic. So this is a brand new figure, but this would be a Generation 1 Barricade because he's designed in that Generation 1 style. The only thing is, Barricade did not exist in Generation 1. This character was introduced in the live action movies. You might recall that scene when Shia LaBeouf is on the run from this cop car, and then the cop car transforms and pins him to the hood of a car and starts pounding his fist, demanding, where is ladies man, whatever. Anyway, so that's the first time anybody saw Barricade, which for me as a Generation 1 fan was kind of frustrating because I was really looking forward to that movie, and I wanted to see some of these classic characters on the big screen. And especially when it comes to the Decepticons, none of the iconic looks I was expecting to see were on screen. Like Megatron did not look like Megatron. Starscream looked nothing like Starscream. And then you gave us characters like this, a brand new character. And I couldn't understand why they would do that when they had so many characters they could have already picked from. But Barricade is what we got. However, I do think it's kind of cool that we are getting Barricade kind of retroactively inserted into the Generation 1 continuity. And this is what he looks like. This is the first ever Barricade toy, not based on the movie line. And I think he turned out pretty well. So you can see his color scheme is black and purple. And he's got that gold face, which is kind of odd, but it stands out. And just kind of makes him a little more interesting, I would say. And as you saw from the picture on the packaging, he does transform into a cop car. So it makes sense that this figure is almost entirely a retool of Prowl. And Prowl is the very well-known Autobot that transforms into a cop car. So there was a Siege version of Prowl, which was basically this exact toy, painted in the standard Prowl colors. I did not purchase that version of Prowl, partly because I thought this toy looked a little short and, I don't know, just lacking a little something. And I still have this Prowl from the Generations line from 10 years ago or so, and I was still relatively content with that Prowl. So, yeah, I haven't bothered to upgrade him yet. But you can see how his design translates over here with the hood of the car kind of folded up front and the doors kind of spread out behind him almost like wings. So yeah, this is Prowl, this is Barricade. They have very similar designs, you know, with the head design and everything there. So you can definitely see the influence of Prowl here. And I think that makes sense. It's kind of cool. He's almost like Prowl's evil twin, and I kind of dig that. So while I still think this figure suffers from the same problems that I thought the Prowl figure suffered from, primarily being his legs just seem too short, and he just seems kind of squatty, and I kind of want Prowl to be an authority figure, and I just don't like him being shorter than the other Transformers in the Siege line. And so yeah, but this guy has all the same issues since it's the same mold. But I don't mind it as much with him because he's a brand new character, and you know, I don't mind shelling out the money to get a brand new character, whereas I didn't want to shell out $30 just to upgrade my Prowl when I thought the one I had was pretty good. So yeah, this figure here, I would recommend it just so you can add a new character to your G1 lineup. So this here is the Siege Starscream figure, which I got a couple of months ago. And if you recall, just an episode or two ago, I showed you this Siege Thundercracker, which is just a repaint of the Starscream. Now, I told you I wasn't sure if I was going to get this figure because while I like the Starscream, I find it has a bit of an unfinished feel. A lot of these little bits here on the side, it kind of has a model kit feel, and I feel it suffers from not having enough paint apps. Just all that gray looks a little flat. And I felt Thundercracker had the same problems, if not maybe even a little more so. There's so much blue on him, and I just feel he needed a little more color. So I talked about how the Decepticon Jets, which is a group known as the Seekers, are basically 6 repaints of the same figure. And I mentioned that I didn't think I would buy any more versions of this Jet, even if they put out all 6 Seekers, because I do have other versions of those characters, and I just don't think this mold justifies me paying $40 a pop for these figures. So I said I thought Thundercracker was very likely the last one of these I would buy. But then I went out and bought this. So this is the same mold, 3 more times, and with even less painted detail than the other ones. So I guess I'm full of shit when I said I wouldn't buy these anymore. But these 3 are not the typical 6 characters. These are kind of the like C-list or D-list Seekers. So we've got Acid Storm, Ion Storm, and Nova Storm. But yeah, it's the exact same mold as the Starscream. And you might also recall, one of the things I liked about Thundercracker was that at least he had a different head sculpt. It was very similar, but he had a bit of a smirk on his face. These guys here, all of the exact same face. It's all the Starscream face. There's no different expressions or anything on these guys. So let's just quickly take a look at them in the package. There's some artwork on the side showing their Cybertronian like spaceship modes. On the back, you just see an image of all the figures in both modes. And then we've got the standard Siege artwork on this side. So now let's pop these guys open. So here they are outside of their packaging. We've got Nova Storm, Ion Storm, and Acid Storm. So as I said before, these are all the exact same figure as Starscream, just with these simpler paint decos. And as I showed you with Thundercracker in my last video, it's a little hard to see their eyes, but all of them feature that same light piping ability. So if you flash some light through the back of their head, their eyes would light up red like that, which is kind of cool. So unless you're a really hardcore Transformers fan, you might be wondering, what's the deal with these guys? I've never heard of them before. Well, these guys date back to the earliest days of Transformers. In the original episodes of the cartoon, before there was dozens and dozens of Transformers to choose from, when the animators were trying to fill the screen to show that Megatron had a whole army of Decepticons behind him, they would just redraw a couple of the key characters over and over again. So they would draw Starscream a whole bunch of times, and they would draw Reflector a whole bunch of times, and then they would just color them different colors. And that's what this was. This was just kind of a cheap way to animate these guys. That's why their colors are very basic and just one big solid color, because it was just a cheat in the animation. And none of these characters had names. It's even unclear if they were even supposed to exist. But you'll even see in episodes of the cartoon that these guys were the main army on Cybertron before the Decepticons left for Earth. So they didn't have jet modes yet. They just had the Cybertronian spaceship, what they call the Tetra Jet, which is just like a weird triangle thing. So even in the animation, you could see how these guys turned into the Tetra Jets. And it wasn't until years later that these characters were actually given names and kind of turned into unique characters. Now, the first one of these characters to really get fleshed out was Acid Storm. And I remember when the first Acid Storm toy came out. The Generation 1 style Transformers were kind of just making a comeback in the mid-2000s. Probably around 2005 is when these figures first started coming out that actually resembled the toys that I grew up on. And Starscream was one of the earlier ones that I got. So there's Starscream. And inevitably, Hasbro just took the Starscream figure and started repainting him to create the other Seekers. Like, for example, here is the repainted version as Thundercracker. Now, I was waiting for them to release all the other Seekers when one day I went into Walmart or Toys R Us or somewhere, and I saw that they had one of these jets painted green, and they were calling him Acid Storm. I didn't buy it because I thought, well, this is just a pointless cash grab. They're already going to sell me this figure 6 times over with the 6 characters that I know. Why am I going to start buying other silly repaints that they're just going to start slapping additional names on? So I didn't buy it. However, that character then went on to actually get developed a little bit in the comic books, and then I really regretted not buying that version of Acid Storm when I had the chance. And so, just earlier this year, because I've been kicking myself for not buying that Acid Storm for about the last 10 years, is I saw that Hasbro released a new version of Acid Storm in their stylized Cyberverse line, which is based on their new animated series. So I went ahead and picked this guy up, even though it's a little outside of the Generation 1 aesthetic that I like to stick to. And I was even more disappointed once I got home with this thing and I realized how limited the articulation is. Like, there's no joint at the knee or anything. It's very stiff. It's very hollow. This thing was $20, and it's definitely not worth it. This is a $10 figure at best. But anyway, that aside, I bought this just so I could finally have a version of Acid Storm in my collection. I did not know that just a couple of months later, I would be buying a much more G1 accurate style of Acid Storm. And so my complaint with these guys is the same as it was on Starscream and Thundercracker. They are really lacking in paint apps. Like, it's very basic looking. It almost looks unfinished. I do feel it's more forgivable on these guys because it's almost a nod to the very simple designs they were supposed to have, since they were just fill-in characters in the background of the cartoon. So I actually think it's kind of funny and kind of neat that they gave us these very basic designs. They would actually be even more basic if they hadn't gone ahead and added some of this kind of muddy battle damage to each of them. So at least that breaks up the green a little bit. But overall, I think it's just really cool to get this character. And yeah, so there he is. That's Acid Storm. So next up, we've got Ion Storm. So he's the blue one. And he's very similar to Thundercracker, who I just got. Even the shades of blue are pretty close. I wish they had maybe gone with a different shade, or even made some changes, like giving him a different color canopy glass, like red or yellow or something, just to differentiate him a little bit, because this Thundercracker was already pretty blue due to the lack of paint apps, and this guy here being solid blue, it almost looks like it could be another version of Thundercracker. However, like I said about Acid Storm, I'm still happy with this very simple version of Ion Storm. He's got kind of a cool history. The fact that he started off as just basically an error or a cheat in the animation, and now here he is with his very own figure. And even though he's not as developed as, say, Acid Storm is, because he was just basically given a unique name a couple of years ago, yeah, I still think it's pretty cool that I finally have these guys. And lastly, here's Nova Storm. He might be my favorite just because he's the most unique looking. This bright yellow really stands out on a shelf. You definitely wouldn't mistake this guy for Starscream or Thrust or anybody else. And yeah, it's just a cool design. Also, the battle damage is most noticeable on him as opposed to the other two guys where he's such a bright yellow that muddiness is very visible. And another cool thing about him is even more developed than these guys. There was a character called Sunstorm, which again was based on just a generic orange painted Seeker from the cartoon. And in the comic books, initially published by Dreamwave, they really took Sunstorm and elevated him as a character and made him very interesting. So I'm actually hoping now that maybe we get the same figure again in orange, so I can add Sunstorm to my collection. Or this version here of Nova Storm is a pretty good fill-in. I suppose if you wanted to display it and say, yeah, that's Sunstorm, you could do that because they look pretty similar. So yeah, this set, even though it's a little repetitive, I think it's a must-have. Now this here is the Transformers Siege Refractor, or as he used to be known, Reflector. And if you watched my video from a couple of weeks ago, I talked about him and how in the vintage toy line and in the cartoon and comic books, there was 3 characters that were basically all identical, and they snapped together to form a camera. In the cartoon, they all looked like this, purple with a green chest plate. But the vintage toy was 3 different colored characters. So when this toy came out, which was the standard Siege version of Refractor, he came, in a single box, and it even advertised that if you bought the same figure 3 times, you could snap them together to make his camera mode. If you buy just the one, he transforms into some half-assed spaceship or something, but everybody knows that this guy's supposed to be a camera. So I considered buying this exact same figure 3 times over so I could do that. But fortunately, before I had the chance to do that, Hasbro released this. Now, it's kind of hard to tell what this is exactly. This box is very, uninteresting, and I actually found this on the shelf at Toys R Us, and I walked right past it. But what you'll see here, it's actually the same character, except in 3 different paint schemes. So you have the more standard kind of green and purple, but then you have the blue and the black and red. So this same toy, painted 3 different ways, is in this box, and he can finally transform into the camera that he's supposed to. But you would never know that from this box. You can sort of see the camera in there peering out at you, but it's a little tough to see. So why don't we pop this guy open and take a look at these 3 versions of Refractor. When it comes to Transformers, I hardly ever show you guys the alternate mode as opposed to the robot mode, because I'm not a vehicle guy. I don't really care about cars and airplanes and stuff. I never transform my Transformers. Most of the time when you buy them, they come in robot mode, and I never transform them into their alt mode. I just display them on my shelf like this. So in this circumstance, this is one of the rare cases where the figure actually came packaged in its alt mode. So I might as well show it to you because he'll probably never be in this form again. So this is Refractor in the camera mode. So obviously he's kind of an old school camera. And so you see here, these 3 pieces, these are 3 different refractors. So these are Refractor's legs bent around backwards, and that's the chest piece, so that's one figure. This is one facing the opposite way with the back of his legs, and then this is the front of the other figure. So the 3 of them all just fold in half and then snap together to give you the camera. And you'll see here, it's got this lens that attaches onto the front, and it's got this kind of tripod stand. So where I said before, if you didn't buy this special gift pack of the 3 figures in the vintage toy colors, you could have just bought this figure 3 times over. And the accessories he comes with are this gun, but you'll see that gun is actually just the tripod stand. So if I did buy this figure 3 times, you could take 3 of these silver guns and snap them together to make the tripod. And the same thing with this shield that he comes with. If I had this figure 3 times over, I could take the 3 silver shields, and you'll see they even have a little like clear plastic lens on the top there. So if I took 3 of them together, they would form the lens here that would snap to the front of them. So that's pretty cool. Now, one of the perks of the set, though, is, so if I bought this guy, he would have the 3 pieces, and he would have the lens, and he would have the tripod. But what he wouldn't have is this piece here, which is like where you would put film in an old school camera. So that's an additional piece that just comes with this figure. You get this piece on the top here that actually says Refractor. This is an additional piece that just comes with this set. And you get the flash bulb. So each one of the 3 figures in here has an additional attachment to make for a much more impressive camera mode than you would get if you just bought this figure 3 times over. So there you go. That's the camera mode. Now let's get these guys transformed and we'll take a look at them in their robot modes. So here are the 3 components of Refractor split up into their individual robot modes. Now, even though on the packaging this guy is called Refractor, each of the 3 robots that combine to form Refractor, I guess, all have unique names. So this guy here in the red is Spectro, and then the blue guy here is Spyglass, and this guy here is Viewfinder. So I guess you consider just Refractor is the name of the camera, sort of like Devastator is the name of the combined Constructicons and stuff like that. So I think these guys are awesome. Like, I loved the individual one already, which I think this guy is great. And these guys are all equally great. But I also like the versatility of these guys. So they all have the same shield and gun option as this version. But I've got them displayed a couple different ways. So you see here with Spectro, he's holding his gun. I've opted not to use his shield. I've got that just set aside over here. But instead, that piece that holds the film kind of forms a different type of shield that plugs into his arm. And it's a much bigger shield, and I kind of like how it's almost like armor on his arm. Kind of reminds me of like what the Spartans would hold up in the 300s if they stick these shields in the ground. Yeah, and it's a cool look, so I really like that. Now with Spyglass here, I've got his gun in his hand, and I've got his shield rather than in his hand. I've got it plugged on to the side of his arm. You could do that on any of them, but it suggested you do that specifically with Spyglass. And then his flash bulb is also just plugged into his arm there. These guys all have the same little sockets, so I could decide to take this out and plug it into one of the other guys if I wanted to. You see he's got a hole in his shoulder as well. But this is the way it intended. Now, this bulb snapped onto the side of him doesn't really do much to make him cool. I don't know. It's could maybe be used as a weapon. I'm sure there's some description in there somewhere that maybe he uses it to throw off his enemies or something. So that's kind of cool. And then lastly here with Viewfinder, he's got his gun in his hand, and I could put his shield in his hand, but I've got that tucked aside. But he has these shoulder pads, which are a pretty cool accessory. I do find at least one of them is a little loose. Like this one stays in place pretty good, but this one here comes off really easily for some reason. They just plug into the hole on his shoulders that they all have. So again, if I wanted to put these shoulder pads on one of the other guys, I could. But yeah, the figures themselves are all the same other than the add-ons, and they're all the same as the basic retail purple version as well. And I still think individually the purple one is my favorite, just because it looks the most like the cartoon. And I actually didn't have the vintage refractor/reflector toy, so I don't necessarily have a nostalgic connection to these various color ones, but I am glad that Hasbro decided to pay homage to the original toy. So anybody that had that as a kid would probably really appreciate seeing them in these color schemes. I think they're all great. Overall, I think that this set is definitely a contender for my year-end list of best toys of the year. You just get a lot of bang for your buck. The fact that you get 3 characters all in one box. They're a combiner. It's a character that we don't see a whole lot of. So many of the other Transformers, we've got dozens and dozens of versions of them, like Bumblebee and Starscream. But this is a character that we've been waiting years and years and years to get an official version from Hasbro, and I really think they knocked it out of the park. I really think this is a great figure. I love the way these guys look. So definitely go pick up the single purple guy, but if you have a chance to pick up this 3-pack, I highly recommend that you do. Now, I really do enjoy Funko Pops. You'll see I've got a bunch of them here. I've got a bunch more of them here. I've got them piling up over here. Piling up over here. I've got them all over my desk at work. And now I've got them piling up in boxes behind the door. But there's one type of Funko Pop I don't typically buy, and that's Marvel characters. You'll see I just have these 5 back here. And one of the main reasons for that is because, unlike all the other Funko Pops, Marvel are bobbleheads. And so their heads just... And that is partly why I don't like bobbleheads. So anyway, as I was saying, I buy a lot of Funko Pops, but I don't buy many Marvel or Star Wars. And the reason being is because that they are bobbleheads while the other ones are just figurines. However, I was in my local comic shop, Strange Adventures, the other day, and they had this holiday version of Thanos, which is just Thanos in his little Christmas sweater, and I just couldn't resist this guy. So I had to pick him up. Now let's pop him open and take a look at him. So here is Holiday Thanos outside of the packaging, and you can see him just bobbling away, which kind of drives me nuts, but I do love this figure. I love just the sculpting. That sneer on his face is kind of mischievous. I like that he's got the Infinity Gauntlet there, and this sweater here, which looks like a little nod to his one true love, Mistress Death, on the front of his sweater. I just think it's great. I also really like kind of the size of his body when compared to, say, another Funko Pop. So here are other Pops just for some comparison purposes. So this is the size of most standard Pops. And you can see Thanos really towers over him. And then you've got King Kong here, which is kind of the larger jumbo Pops. I've got a few of those. I've got King Kong, Godzilla, and Jaws. Thanos is somewhere in between. He's not quite as big as the kind of the jumbo monster Pops, but he's clearly bigger and towers over your standard Pop figure. And he actually was the same price as these guys, so that's pretty good bang for your buck. And Thanos, considering what a powerful and imposing character he is, yeah, it works for me that he's so large. I'm glad he's not this big or bigger. I think he's kind of just the right size that you would believe he still fits into the same universe as these other figures. And I really dig it. It's the kind of toy that I can actually bring upstairs and put on the mantle once we get the Christmas tree up. And it's really cute. They put out some of these holiday Marvel Pops last year. There's like Spider-Man in a Christmas sweater and stuff too. And I kind of thought they were silly, and I wasn't going to waste my money on kind of a novelty little such a specific thing, because I figured, you'd pack these away with your Christmas ornaments every year, and you'd only break it out to display for a month at a time. But now that I have this Thanos, and I kind of think he's adorable, I'm actually tempted to maybe pick up some of those other holiday Pops, and maybe I will break them out every Christmas. So I was at Toys R Us on Monday, and that's where I picked up that 3-pack of Seekers and that 3-pack of Refractors. And both of them were $100, which sucked because I was not planning on spending any money that day. We were just going out for dinner, and the restaurant happened to be next door to Toys R Us, so I popped in there just for a look. Wasn't expecting to find anything. Anyway, it really kind of killed me to spend $200 on those Transformers. but I did. But then within a day or two, there was a new flyer posted for Toys R Us online, and they showed that both of the Transformers that I bought were now $20 off. So I said, well, man, I'm going to bring my receipt in there and get refunded that $40. So I went back on the weekend. I asked them for my $40 back, and they had no problem giving it to me. But then I found this exclusive Toys R Us figure, which is IG-11. And this is kind of the character that's very similar to IG-88. We'll see just how similar in a second when I compare them. But this character is from the new TV series, The Mandolorian. So, yeah, he was $30, so I ended up basically blowing all the money and just got refunded to me. But, yeah, he was a pretty cool find because, again, I wasn't expecting to find anything because I'd just been in there a couple of days earlier, but they actually had a bunch of new stuff. And, yeah, I grabbed IG-11. So let's take a look at him. So here is IG-11 outside of the packaging from the front. Here he is from the back. Just kidding, I didn't actually turn him around yet, but you can barely tell the difference anyway. Pretty much the same thing. Anyway, so yeah, this is a pretty cool figure. He looks very familiar to the Bounty Hunter IG-88 that was first introduced in Empire Strikes Back. And IG-88 was actually my favorite Bounty Hunter. I know everybody loves Boba Fett, and that is understandable. Same as Bosk, the lizard guy, I also think is really cool. But the problem is my brother Doug had both of those figures when we were kids. He also had Forlom, and neither of us had Zuckuss or Dengar. So IG-88 was the only Bounty Hunter toy that I had. So I do think he's cool, but I think he's extra cool just because he was the only one I had. And so when we played with our toys as a kid, IG-88 was always kind of one of the stars of the show, and he was a total badass. Whereas my brother had to distribute his Bounty Hunter badassery between 3 figures. For me, IG-88 was what it was all about. So when they showed the trailer for The Mandalorian, and there was a shot of what I thought was IG-88 spinning around and firing guns in every direction, I thought, awesome, finally we get to see IG-88 do something, because in the movie, literally, this is all he did. It was just a quick walk by while Darth Vader was saying, I want you guys to go out and find Han Solo, and that was it. He had probably not even a minute of screen time. So anyway, in the weeks since I first saw the trailer for The Mandalorian, I have since learned that the robot was called IG-11, so he's a droid similar to IG-88, but not the same character. So yeah, when I was in the store the other day, they had this figure. He was an exclusive. I scooped him up, and I was quite curious to get him home and compare him to IG-88. So here he is next to IG-88. And I can tell you, now that I have them side by side, they are the exact same. There is absolutely nothing different on the sculpt. When I was looking at this thing in the store, I thought how he has that hole right through the middle of his face there. I thought, well, maybe that's new. I don't know if I remember IG-88 having that hole right through the middle. But sure enough, he does. And everything on the legs, it's all the same. So the only thing they've changed is the bandolier. So where IG-88 has the one strap, and he's got that kind of bladed weapon there. IG-11 has the double bandolier, and he does not have an axe weapon. Looks like he does have a little bit of a holster there where you could store his pistol. And speaking of pistol, these guys have the exact same weapons. So they've got a rifle and a pistol. So same 2 guns that IG-88 came with. Now this guy here, if you look at his hands, he can't actually hold anything with these claws, but he's got that little peg there. So the weapons have a little hole. I don't know if you can see that there. So he doesn't really hold the gun so much as it just gets pegged into place there. So there you go. That just attaches to the peg now. It kind of looks like he's holding it, but the claw doesn't actually grip the weapon. So the one thing that's different too, besides the bandolier, is the paint job. It's subtle, But this guy's got kind of a bronzier paint job. So you can see like his shoulder pads are clearly bronze, where his are more brass, we'll say. So yeah, it's not that different, but it's different enough. You kind of see it on the legs a little bit too. It's just kind of, looks like they're both supposed to be silver robots, but the wash, they're weathered a little bit differently. So that's okay. One thing I do appreciate about this IG-11 figure is when I got IG-88, and I've probably had him for a couple of years now, when I got him, I remember him being very stiff and thinking, well, that's about right for IG-88. The original figure was very stiff. His arms moved, up and down like that. He doesn't have any elbows, and his legs move forward too, and his head spins. But other than that, his articulation was very limited. He wasn't nearly as movable as the other figures in the Star Wars Black Series. So when I got this figure and I realized, oh man, it's the exact same figure as IG-88, so that means he can't even do the move that it shows him do in the trailer for The Mandalorian, where he points both of his arms outwards, like so, and then just spins around and he shoots. And so while I was thinking that, I'm like, oh, his arms are on ball joints, and they can actually pop out like that and spin around. And he's got a torso crunch there, as well as his head spins. And it was then that I realized that he actually does have articulation at the knee. There's a ball joint there. His ankles are articulated. He's actually got a decent amount of movement, and so does IG-88. I guess when I first got him, I just didn't look at him very hard, and I just kind of assumed he had no articulation. So IG-11 has pointed out to me that both these figures have a decent amount of articulation. And while I wish he was a little bit different, like maybe his head sculpt could be a little different at least, because I do love this character, I don't mind getting a second version of him, and I do look forward to seeing IG-11 in action on the screen when The Mandalorian comes out in a week or so. So yeah, pretty cool figure. Pick this one up, especially if you don't already have IG-88. And I do just have a couple of other quick things I want to show you before I sign off. I didn't get any more brand new figures, but I did go to one of my local comic book shops this week, Giant Robot Comics, and I picked up some used figures. So this here is the Green Lantern character Kilowog, and this is a 6-inch figure that was produced by DC Direct. At least I assume so. It looks like a DC Direct figure. But yeah, so this guy was used, and they were charging $14.99 for him used, which is fine because this was, I would say, clearly a $30 figure when it first came out. And I am a big Green Lantern fan. It's probably my favorite corner of the DC universe, even more so than, say, Batman or Superman. Green Lantern is the only DC character that I collect the comic of on a regular basis. And I buy all the spin-offs. Like, for example, there have been multiple books based on the Green Lantern Corps, just all the other characters, not even including the main guy, Hal Jordan. And I've really come to appreciate all the little side characters, and anytime I get an opportunity to expand my ranks of my Green Lantern Corps, I do, and Kilowog is one of the main ones that I haven't been able to get a figure of before. I've just never really come across one, so when I found this guy, I was pretty stoked to get him. So here's a look at my Green Lantern Corps so far. And so here are the last figures I have to show you this week. So these are a bunch of modern era G.I. Joes that I picked up used at Giant Robot Comics for $10 a pop. Now, I'm a huge G.I. Joe fan, and I have a whole bunch of them. You've probably seen them in the background of most of my videos. You can see a whole bunch of them kind of smattered all along the background there. It was in 2007 when Hasbro started releasing what is known as the modern era G.I. Joes. So these figures are a little bit taller and a little bit more detailed than all the previous versions of G.I. Joe. And they also don't have a little rubber washer holding them together, because that's what was used to hold together the vintage G.I. Joes from the 80s. And most of my 80s G.I. Joes are now in pieces because the washer has rotted away. So Hasbro changed that up to make these figures more durable, last a little bit longer. So anyway, from 2007 onward, right up until 2018, there was lots of modern era G.I. Joes. So it ran for more than a decade. And a whole lot of figures were produced. Way more G.I. Joe figures than were produced during the vintage days when I was a kid. And it seemed like there was a lot of them then. So I buy a lot of G.I. Joes, but I didn't buy all of them. And one of the eras when I really stopped was when the first live action movie, The Rise of Cobra, came out. So I've got a couple Rise of Cobra figures here. So here is General Hawk, as played by Dennis Quaid, and I think it's actually a pretty good likeness to Dennis Quaid. And this here is Ripcord, as played by Marlon Wayans. So the thing of it is I really liked the classic looking figures that Hasbro started putting out in 2007. I liked all the updates with the new detail and the increased size, but I liked how they were all throwbacks to the figures that I had as a kid. And then when the movie came out, they got away from making vintage style toys and they went with this new movie aesthetic. So the characters started looking like the actors and the outfits tended to be a lot more bland and I guess realistic. But I didn't really care for them very much. So generally I would buy one version of each character. So even though they made a whole bunch of Dukes that looked like Channing Tatum, I only bought one of them. And they made a whole bunch of Ripcords that looked like Marlon Wayans, but I only bought one of them. I didn't actually buy any versions of General Hawk because I thought it was such a boring looking figure. And so yeah, there's lots of holes in my collection from the Rise of Cobra era. And that kind of rolled into Hasbro followed up Rise of Cobra with a line they called Pursuit of Cobra. And so this here is a Beachhead and this here is a Duke. And these guys are from the Pursuit of Cobra line. This guy here is called Whiteout, even though he's got the wrong display base. I know it says Snow Job here, but this is Whiteout. These characters are all from like the Pursuit of Cobra line. And these were actually some really great figures. They're arguably some of the best modern era G.I. Joes that Hasbro ever produced. But I was still a little sour on the G.I. Joe line after the Rise of Cobra movie line, so I didn't really get on board with this right away. And I also felt like these versions, like this is Duke, and it's so different from the standard Duke that I felt like I don't need these versions because they don't look like the classic versions. Same as Beachhead here. This is the Pursuit of Cobra version. So you can see he's got a ton of sculpted detail. Lots of neat little weapons. He's got these flippers that connect to the back of his vest there that can be taken off and put on his feet. He's got this removable gas mask. And underneath he's got his ski mask that he's known for. But Beachhead always had a green ski mask when I was a kid. And so I didn't really feel I needed this figure because I didn't think it looked enough like classic Beachhead. And then lastly, you see here I've got Tunnel Rat. And he is based on the animated series called Renegades, which came out shortly after the Rise of Cobra. And again, I didn't feel I needed toys based on this kind of stylized animation. I was really strictly only looking to buy toys based on the 80s original toy line. Now, as the years went on, and Hasbro kind of went back to focusing on the classic G.I. Joes, I kind of softened my opinion on these figures. At the time, I think I was worried that they were going to take over the brand and that G.I. Joe was going to not look like the brand I remembered growing up with. But since it was just kind of a short-lived flash in the pan, it was like a brief era of G.I. Joe, I kind of was able to appreciate it for what it was, and I realized, you know what, I really missed out on some really cool figures from those years. And unfortunately now they're pretty hard to find, and some of them can be pretty expensive on the secondary market. So to come across them at $10 a pop, I think it's a pretty good price. I don't mind at all that they were open because I open up all my figures anyway. And yeah, I think they're really great. This Tunnel Rat especially, it's way better than the standard Tunnel Rat figure I have. So I think this is a really cool addition. I love the way his overalls are sculpted, kind of just draped off of him like that. Even though I think this is a boring figure in general, I think it's kind of cool to have the Dennis Quaid likeness. You know, there was a couple versions, I believe, that they made that looked like Dennis Quaid. So, You know, I should have at least one of them. And this guy's got kind of the jetpack with the wings that jut out and everything, which is kind of cool. And then White out here, he's essentially a new character. And he's the kind of character with a hood and goggles. They could have got away with reusing a head sculpt, but he's actually got an original head sculpt that belongs just to him. I think these goggles come off. I'm sure they come off, but I'm not going to mess with them right now. But yeah, so he's got a unique head sculpt, and it's always cool to get brand new characters rather than just redos of the same old guys. And yeah, even Marlon Wayans. I really did not appreciate Marlon Wayans as Ripcord, but if you can kind of set aside the movie for a second and forget the fact that maybe, you know, Marlon Wayans was not the best choice to play Ripcord, this is a really good figure. And it's a good, you know, pretty realistic looking military figure. And yeah, so now I really kind of like the figures from this era, and I'm trying to fill in those holes in my collection whenever I get the chance. Okay, so that's all the new toys I got this week. So as always, thanks for watching. Feel free to leave comments below, and I'll make sure to answer. And yeah, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends. And yeah, if you watched my last video, I talked all about the Action Force Kickstarter, which is still going on. There's a little less than 2 weeks on the project right now. So if you haven't watched that video, I would encourage you to do so, and maybe go back the project. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.
Casey, say goodbye. Say goodbye, Busty.